Hello everyone and welcome to the second course of the Measuring Impact for Sustainability Masterclass. I'm Dureen Shanaz. I'm the founder and CEO of IX. So I'm very excited to have you here for this class. So in the last video, we explored the fundamentals of impact, focusing on what is impact and why it is important to measure impact, especially for enterprises that are innovating solutions for the Sustainable Development Goals. And once again, it's very important as investors or any other ecosystem players because you need to know how these enterprises are growing and moving forward with impact as a core part of their DNA. So in this course today, we're going to shift gears and look more closely at impact measurement from the perspective of investors. Whether you're an active impact investor or you and your team are just starting on your impact journey, I'm confident that you'll gain some new insights on the impact measurement process today. So let's get started. So the learning objective today is to recognize the importance of evaluating impact as an investor. So again, a big focus from the investor perspective in today's class. We'll also understand how to measure impact using the IX's proprietary impact assessment methodology. And then we'll also explore the key elements of the assessment process. So let's get started. Now, before we actually go into the details and the depths of the approach, I do want to do a little bit of recap from last week. So the next few slides are the slides you have seen before, but again, this is a very, very quick recap. So first and foremost is the IX's impact assessment approach. And this really captures in a very effective way many of the impact measurement methodologies that you may have heard or that you're familiar with in terms of theory of change, in terms of various other monitoring and evaluation process. So in this case, once again, you know this, but we're just recapping. We look at this pyramid really from top down. So we start with the mission of the enterprise. We focus then on the financial viability. Then we look at the social and the impact, environmental impact. And then we look at the overall sustainable development goals, how it's achieving, and how the impact of it on the community. So on the right side, you'll see that the pyramid very effectively captures the impact value chain in terms of the intentionality, in terms of the efficiency of the enterprise, and then the effectiveness, and then, of course, the macroeconomic impact of the organization on the community. And why is that important? That is important, as you'll find out also today, is because that is a direct link on also mitigating risk on the operation side of the organization. Now moving on, this again, the next slide, what you have seen, which is really talking about the impact pyramid and how this is a broad set of issues that's covered in terms of the sector, country, and the mission-specific indicators to assess the sustainability. Now, as I mentioned, the impact value chain is very, very important. So that's something that you should make yourself very familiar with. It's also important to evaluate the financial viability. So it's not just looking at the impact in a vacuum, but really looking at the organization, if they're financially viable or not. Because if they're not financially viable, then the impact that they can create is not possible. It is also very important to build an impact value map, which again we touched on in the last course, and which really demonstrate the sort of the cause and effect. This is basically what we call the theory of change, and really seeing if something happens, what's sort of the impact, the effect of that. And then looking at the metrics, how do you actually find the right indicators in terms of the stakeholders you're working with to capture the change that's happening in their lives, or even the change that's happening with that environmental issue or process. So it's really a mix of some quantitative and qualitative metrics and the data collection, etc. But it all starts with a framework and understanding the framework. So let us go through the impact assessment process. So, what's the process that you go through? So up till now, you have a little bit about what it means to have a mission in terms of impact pyramid, in terms of walking through the impact pyramid. You know about efficiency and effectiveness. So now let's kind of start the work. We're taking baby steps here. So the first thing you do, obviously, is you need to identify and evaluate
the enterprise. So you have to say, okay, let's look at the enterprise and see what is their business, what is their mission, what they are actually doing. So we look at the enterprise in terms of the impact that they're creating, right? So that's kind of the first step. So we will look at their need, the capital need, but also we'll look at the social impacts. If you think of the value chain, where does it fall in and how do we do it? It's like the input, activity, output, and then the outcome. So write something down for each one of them. Then we're looking at developing the framework. Again, the process of creating this framework is really a way for you to think through the various metrics, that we have, and how will it kind of fall in, and who are the stakeholders in every step of it. Then what we'll do is we'll verify that impact, because you will actually make some assumption yourself before going into the field. You will then actually look to verify it and the stakeholders that you have, and the questions that you're going to be asking, and the activities, and what you have put in vis-a-vis the activities. So when you go and verify this when you're in the field, you come back, and that's also then after this you should have a report, and then of course you're validating the impact as you move forward.
So let's get started on evaluating impact as an investor. So as an investor, you need to sort of step back and you need to look at what is really your approach and what you're trying to achieve by this investment. So should this investment be a combination of your personal or your organizational motivation for impact investing? What is your risk appetite? What should be the investment size? What are the legal and organizational constraints? So there are many questions that you need to answer. And how do you actually sort of go about all that? Well, first and foremost, it's always very important to actually understand what is your impact goal. So every impact investor needs to have their personalized sort of investment thesis. I mean, why are you doing it? If you are an investor who is in Hong Kong, and you want to invest, you're looking at investing in something in the Philippines, why are you looking at that? Is it because you have other investments there? Is it actually because someone in your team knows more about the Philippines than any other country? Or is it simply because you think you'll have greater impact? Or do you think that the particular investment you're looking at is going to give you more financial return? Then the impact really comes in second. So you really need to look at all of that and really kind of create a thesis around your investment. And that will allow you to put a stake in the ground in terms of how you're going to move forward. And you need to be able to include these objectives in the ultimate result that you're trying to get from your investment. So if you look at this, the slide in front of you, you'll see that overall impact strategy, that really equals to the impact goals and expectations. You have also with that the financial goals and expectations. And then you have the available resources. And that is also important because if as an investor you want to invest in a sector or a country and you don't know much about, you do need the right partner. You need the right intermediary who's going to help you in terms of achieving those deficiencies you may have when you're approaching this investment. But while you're doing all that, I always say start simple and step back and basically see what actually motivates you and why you're doing this. So are you impact first or are you finance first? And again, we are not making a value judgment here. It's the value judgment is from you. What is more important to you? And given your portfolio, what do you want to focus on? Now, I have to bring into perspective what's happening now globally with COVID-19 and what we are seeing in terms of some of these investments. So maybe that will help you make some of the decisions when you look at this chart and when you're evaluating your own position. What we're seeing is the fact that when you are very related to the market, to the financial markets, you're very much at the mercy of it, no matter how effective you are making your decision and how many numbers you're running in terms of analysis. Now, interestingly, the investments on the impact investing side, more often than not, they're not very connected to the market. And because you're working with underserved communities who are, frankly, they're not a part of the market. So this actually works as a wonderful diversification for your portfolio. So traditionally, you would see investors have about 1% or so allocated to impact investment. But I would actually say that, well, that's great, that's better than nothing, but you may want to think deep and really think about in terms of diversification and also risk mitigation in terms of these impact investment opportunities, because it's not just about creating impact, it's also the impact that you're creating, how it does mitigate risk in your own portfolio and also in terms of the investment in itself. So it is sort of an interesting, complex process, but do think about it in a bigger picture, not just what you're going to do for the organization when you're making that investment, but what the organization will do for you and for your portfolio as you move forward. So keeping all of this in mind, this is a good start when you are actually looking at the process of starting to look at the investment. So before you go into portfolio management, it is very important to look at actually the way you're doing your investment. Again, are you doing it with the social objective as the first indicator, or are you looking at the financial objective as the first indicator? So whatever it is, I think what's important to know here is to conduct that right pre-investment sort of screening, because if the organization is really looking for grant, meaning free capital where you will not get the money back, and if that's not your goal, I think it is important that you don't move further down. You need to be on the same page with the organization in terms of investment goals and saying this is something that you're putting in money, that you actually want the impact to be there, but you need that money back. So what that means is you can also look at how that return can be achieved. So on the financial side, so should it be a revenue share? Should it be now some form of loan? Should it be, even when you're looking at the structure of the investment, be some sort of a convertible, because you really can't figure out what the valuation should be of the organization. So these are all the things you need to sort of consider and think through, because these are not organizations where you walk in and you just start talking about valuation just because this is how you're used to doing things from a VC perspective or the Silicon Valley perspective, because again, we have to say that because this the impact investing space is very, very different. So if you look at on the right side of the screen and you see that sort of a circular diagram, the key thing here is to really start from where it says in the lower right hand corner, inform investment or grant decision. This is really the step one, where you really are thinking of how this is going to be moving forward. If you're so compelled and you're just moved by the actual mission and you say, I really don't care, so you can actually do this as a venture philanthropy. If you get the money back, great. If you don't, doesn't matter. But I would say that you really need to kind of think about this as an investment and really think of different ways how you can recover, that investment. Similarly, you have to also see that you have to ensure that the mission and the strategy is aligned, between you and the organization. So that is something that you have to also keep on coming back to over and over again, that what you're trying to get out of it, that's what the organization also wants to get out of it. So the mission alignment between you and the organization is extremely important. You also need to see if you can play a role in the marketing, in the gaining credibility and trust from other stakeholders. It's just not about giving money, but it really is about how to play a critical role in helping that organization grow. So if you are investing in a country that you don't have any contacts or if you don't know much about, then you really are relying on the organization to have those, or again, you're relying on your advisor or intermediary to help you connect those dots. But it is very, very important that these organizations actually have a network of stakeholders, because they do need that in order to grow and be effective in what they're doing. And that really also makes it very, very important to have the link in driving revenue. And that's what you see on top on the diagram, drive revenue growth by understanding organization's customer. End of the day, these are businesses. So they have to know what the customer wants. They have to know how to get to the customer and actually how to bring revenue in. And that is extremely important. And really understanding that customer base and actually being able to pivot if anything changes with that customer base. And as all that is happening, the organization needs to operationally be effective and also be efficient. So that can only happen if, again, all the goals are aligned and you are working hand in hand in terms of how their growth is helping you as well, as an investor. So these are all the ways that, again, it's a very reiterative process, but it is a process that's very essential. And once you have that in place, you can then look at the methodology, and that's when you look on the left, in terms of how to measure the impact that's happening. So again, very important to go through all that on the right to go to the left. And that's where you kind of see, and starting off, great, so now I have my investment, whether it's a convertible or revenue share or however it is. I know, what the framework is in terms of measuring the impact. I know how that's going to mitigate risk for this investment, and also putting in certain indicators and starting to measure some of these objectives on the impact side. And that's where, again, the data collection comes in. But once again, these are always after you have created a good understanding of the investment, and you have the framework in order to collect the data. And then, of course, once you're collecting the data, you can do some of the audits. You can actually make sure meeting the goals that were in place. And then that having an overall objective and reflection on your entire portfolio. And of course, then you have a portfolio report. So what you see on the left is actually a lot of work that's kind of put in kind of simple bullet points, but that's really the process when you have the portfolio after you look at each single investment and conduct the thorough review and be able to sort of move forward and pulling all of them together under a portfolio perspective.
Now, so at the end, if you look at it, the impact framework and the data collection and the SROI, the social return on investment, the model and all of this is how it should look like. But those are just sort of the outputs, of the report. So now let's sort of go a little deeper and look at some of the little bit more of the details. So the framework, let's spend a little bit of time on the framework. So if you look at the framework, the purpose of it is to really have a projection for the expected outcome and the impact. So this means that you will be, once again, if you remember the analogy of the stone falling in the water and the ripples, you're actually making a framework based on those ripples, what you think those ripples are. So you will then also define a metrics, for each one of them, and you're going to create sort of a structure, in terms of the activities that fall under it. So what do I mean by this? If you look at this, the impact enterprise, on the left you have the effectiveness, and then the right you have the efficiency. So once again, the efficiency is very much driven by the financials. So you'll see in terms of the revenue, in terms of the OPEX and the CAPEX, and you're looking at, of course, the financial return with it. And then what you're doing in the effectiveness is really the various indicators, of the operations. So this is where, once again, if you remember the IRIS, Impact Reporting Investment Standard, you will go to IRIS and start looking at some of these indicators. For this sector, for this type of work, that's a very good start. And sometimes you'll say, okay, hold on, but they're doing certain activities that I can't just go to IRIS and just take it from there. So that's where you also have to kind of come in with your own thinking on how to best basically demonstrate the activity that's going in and what indicates that, and what is the target they're trying to meet with each one of them. Now, this step graph is actually quite important, because this is actually what shows you step by step what you need to do in terms of understanding the organization, then actually trying to measure the impact and then putting it in the framework, and then of course being able to use it. So if you look at it, the step one, when we actually look at an organization, the first and foremost is you have to look at the documents, what they're sending, because the company may say, my mission is this, and then you start looking at the organization, see what they're doing, you'll see, oh, actually there's no correlation with what they're saying their mission is and what they're actually doing. So it really is very important to see that there's a correlation between what the organization's activity and what the mission that they're trying to achieve. So there's the intentionality is the right one. And then once you have that, you will have to then map the impact value chain, right? So again, input, activity, output, and outcome. So you're doing that, and under each one, you will be actually defining the stakeholders, right? What do I mean by stakeholders? Stakeholders, if you're going back to that youth example, the primary stakeholder is the youth. You also have the trainer is one of the stakeholders. You have the youth's family as a stakeholder. You have the community who now actually has these youth working at this call center, who now have this income that's coming in. The community is a stakeholder. So you have various stakeholders, and you need to figure out where they fall in the impact value chain. Are they the primary stakeholder? Are they secondary stakeholder? So you're really kind of doing this, piece by piece. Then you need to actually develop the framework and the categories, and that's where that step-by-step comes in terms of the stakeholders and the activities that they're doing. And you need to now look at it vis-a-vis the pyramid and then the business model. So this step one is actually a lot of work. So you see a lot of things underneath that, and that really sets you up for the rest of the work. So step two, when you're also looking at the impact value chain, hand in hand, I always encourage people to also think about theory of change. This is, again, something a lot of you may be familiar with. This was sort of and still is the bread and butter for a lot of the development organizations. It's the bread and butter for a lot of the donors. But one of the issues with theory of change, it is really focused on if this happens, then what happens. That's great, but it doesn't go into the details of how to actually do something in a forward-looking way and how to actually measure it. So it sort of helps you understand what's happening, but it doesn't take you to the next level. So you need to actually have a way to make sure that when you're having the kickoff meeting with the organization, that you are on the same page regarding your impact value chain and the theory of change. And then you go through also the stakeholders, say that this is the stakeholders we're thinking, is this correct? Is that what you also see it as? And then of course, you make sure if you're all coming to the same page by various information exchange. Now, based on all this, you will refine the impact framework. The reason I keep on saying it, about refining and tweaking and so on and so forth and reviewing, it's because you need to understand this is not something that happens like this. This is not your formula that you write down and all of a sudden you have, voila, you have something at the end. This is an iterative process for you to make sure that everyone feels that they're part of the process and that you're not missing anyone, okay? Because again, you're trying to calculate all the ripples, okay? You need to calculate also the sustainability of those ripples. It's make sure that you have the right understanding, and it all stems from that first how when the stone touches the water, which is again the social mission, right? So the environmental mission. So based on that, you will create the model. You will actually, and if you can imagine, on the impact side, you're creating exactly the same kind of model that you have on the financial side as well, forward-looking, right? And which goes hand in hand with the financial model. And then once you do all that, you have the model laid out, you have the numbers filled up, and then you will discount it all back and have a DCF model just when you have it in the financial side. So this is where the last step is really when you're creating the impact summary, right? Once you've done all this work, then you say, okay, we have gone through all this, we have done all this analysis, and now at the end it's just one number, which is this social return on investment. So it's quite exciting, and it's a process in itself. It's just like an incredible discovery, and you'll see even the organization themselves, they'll figure out, they're making impact in ways that they don't even know. So it's kind of fun. It's actually really, really fun when you're doing it. So what we just talked about, let's sort of look at it visually, what this means. So here you see that impact measurement, sort of what we say the pathway, it really means, where you are at each stage. So when you're looking at the first step work, you're looking at the framework and the projections, you're just sort of, you're already kind of there. You've done 1/3 of the work. And then in terms of the impact on the data collection and the monitoring of the data collection that's happening, you're almost there. And then what we say is, interestingly, at this stage, a lot of the organizations are raising capital. And of course, in an ideal world, we would like to see the last stage happen as well, which is even after you raise the capital, you actually have the impact verification. Now, interestingly, even with our own work, we see this only happens when the organization goes out and raises capital again. So in between, we don't see it a lot of times, but again, that's something that we are trying to change. Now, in terms of the of the impact verification. If you, again, what you see here, this is a little bit more detail of the chart that you saw a couple of slides ago, which is you're looking at the framework. Once again, it's really based on the mission of the organization. Then you have the data collection based on after you do the impact value chain. You actually then verify the data. You adjust the framework. Once again, maybe you came in with certain thoughts and that's not what it looks like. So you go back and readjust it. And then you do the analysis and the recommendation. So now, one of the big things is, as I said, as you are looking at this process, it's also making sure you are accounting for all the stakeholders, who are part of the process. So one of the interesting, I would say, thing to do when you're doing the impact measurement is doing a mapping of who are all the stakeholders, right? So what we mean by the stakeholders, that any group of people, or again, thing, in this case, the environment, who are experiencing the change, which is perhaps not as, some of them are direct and some of them are even indirect, right? So what you do here is basically we're saying, okay, who are the people who should be included? So you are looking at that they have experienced a substantial change, and you actually need to then kind of measure that. You would be, without affecting, you would be unable to achieve the outcome, that if you don't actually put them into the equation, that you're actually telling half the story, and you can actually measure them. And if not, of course, you have to make some assumption around it. And again, very important for you to kind of say who is the primary stakeholders and who's the secondary and tertiary. So usually we look at 3 levels, of stakeholders, and it's good to kind of have that in mind. And who are the folks and the things that you should not be bringing into the equation? These are really the ones who are having minimal change, and you'll say, okay, how do I think what is maximum, what is minimum? You just have to kind of make your educated guess. So again, in other words, if the service wasn't there, it would really make no difference in their life, right? So in other words, say for example, when we work with an organization with bringing, say, solar panels into a village. Now there must be some villagers there who already have electricity because they can afford it. They were able to somehow bring in a line from a nearby power station and they have electricity. Now, your solar panels, will they make a difference in their life? Not that much, because they already have the electricity, right? So, however, the way you may look at it is maybe they're one of the tertiary benefactors, because now they may not need to have this expensive electricity, but because the others in the village now have the solar panel, they can take a solar panel as well. Okay, so that's what we mean by that. So you see here that, to the indirectly affected by the activity and the secondary stakeholder here, we say the secondary stakeholder, once again, I will say that you have to make a decision on how important the secondary stakeholder is. Sometimes they should be excluded and sometimes not. Interestingly, we do see more and more and more that we are having to include the secondary stakeholders and sometimes even tertiary. So sometimes, say for example, a lot of times the secondary stakeholders is the environment. So I remember when we started doing it initially, we would not focus on it as much because the enterprises would get very upset because they're like, it's hard enough to do this, what we're doing, on the social side, and which I agree. But now we're seeing more and more the secondary stakeholder, which is the environment, is really becoming one of the more primary stakeholders. So it really, again, is how you define everything. Now, let's spend a few minutes on theory of change, because I did say that it is something, it's a good discipline to know, and it's also good to know as it goes, very much hand in hand when you're doing the impact value chain. So theory of change is really a lot of times you'll hear people talking about a log framework. It's kind of in a very cool short term. They'll say, oh, do you know log framework? It's nothing more than theory of change. It's the other name for it. And it really is something, once again, if you ask someone from the finance space, hey, do you know log framework? They'll say, what are you talking about? Because it's a very, very development lingo, right? And very much started by USAID and now used by a lot of other development folks. Now, what it does is it really sort of maps out a chain of events that links the organization's activity. And I have to say, in the slide, the key words here is if then. I always say that's sort of the basis of theory of change. If this happens, then what will happen? If this input goes in, then what output is going to come out? So it really is a way to kind of, again, as you saw in the impact value chain, I would say in a more qualitative way of looking at that. And, again, big focus on the activities and, kind of jumping into the outputs. And a lot of times what happens is with theory of change, unfortunately, a lot of times outputs are mistaken for outcomes. Okay, and again, this is an important piece of information because outputs and outcomes are two different things. Again, you do need to understand that. But once again, what theory of change does, it actually helps you at least understand the process. So do spend a few minutes on it. And it is, once again, a lingo that a lot of people use. And it provides a systematic and a visual way to present, sort of the relationship of the various inputs, the activities, and the change, that happens. So let's actually spend a few minutes looking at the indicators, because remember, when you're doing the impact value chain or even thinking of theory of change, you actually also need to look at the activities and the indicators, which can actually enable you to figure out what's the delta that's going to have the change. So you have to kind of say, are these indicators, are they qualitative or quantitative? You actually have to first look at that. And then you need to kind of say, okay, how easily can it be measured? Can you actually give a proxy for it? Is it something that is a parallel in a similar sector? You actually need to see if it can reflect the change connected to and some sort of an intervention. And you also need to see if it assesses the performance of any other actors, in the space. So all of these indicators, you need to kind of be able to identify sort of the direct and the indirect way how it actually influences, the service of the activity. Now, in terms of the qualitative and the quantitative indicators, if you define it, you have to see the quantitative one. Obviously, you should be able to measure it. It includes, you can the counts, the frequency, the ratio, the average, the value. So, it's sort of that the quantitative can be, say, vaccination. How many vaccinations I can get, how many people are getting it, what's the frequency of it, etc. The qualitative is understanding sort of the change, that it happens. So going with the vaccination example, does that actually mean that people are having less chickenpox? Okay, that means the rate of chickenpox has actually gone down. Does this actually mean that people are spending less on healthcare? Where they would have, if you get a cholera vaccination, so people in that village are not having to spend money to go to the doctor. So it really is, some of it is being able to actually make that assumption of what that qualitative change can be. And then what we do is put a measurement behind that, sort of the dollars saved with not having to go to the doctor, right? So being able to measure that, giving a quantitative indicator to the qualitative change that's happening. And then in terms of the purpose, you look at, in terms of the indicator, you say it captures the extent of the change and the scale of the change that's happening on the quantitative side, and again, easily measurable. And in terms of the qualitative side, why that change is happening. So, and how sustainable can it be, right? So that's something we kind of look at. Again, going back to the vaccination, well, it is sustainable for a year. So does that mean, again, certain type of vaccination, say cholera, does that mean they have to do it every year? Is the organization actually able to provide the service? Are people willing to do this every year? Yes, if they actually can show them that they're having, less cholera, and maybe that is sustainable. So that change can be sustainable. So, it's very, very interesting. These are really in the nuances. And then, of course, it's the method of collection, because in terms of the quantitative, it's a little easier in terms of putting the indicators and collecting data across that. And the qualitative is more where you do the interviews, but then also you have to make certain assumptions and then create as I said, the indicator vis-a-vis that, which can be quantified, right? So that's why it becomes very important. So let's spend a couple of more minutes going a little deeper on IRIS, the Impact Reporting Investment Standard. And once again, please do look at it, the website. It's a very interesting concept where we basically, took what's qualitative and made it into something that's more measurable. So it really, a lot of it you'll see is output driven, but there are also obviously a lot of it that's outcome as well. So it really provides a detailed database of indicators of various sectors. It also looks at the generally accepted sort of the performance matrices, and these are, of course, again, something that came about with taking consensus from various folks in the social sector space, and this is now, it has been almost 10 years, that is now very much in practice. So these are, to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier on, they're output level indicators. Now, of course, you all are experts after the last few slides on the difference between output and outcome, but it does focus on output, and then for you to sort of say, okay, how do we kind of make this into the outcome, the next stage? And some of it does mention the outcome, but a lot of them don't, because the outcomes can be very country specific or sometimes even community specific. So that is where some of the, I guess, the human judgment, comes in as well. And the nice things about IRIS is it easily allows you to benchmark, so if you're collecting some data, it allows you to kind of benchmark in comparison between the various organizations. So how do you sort of go about sort of collecting the data? And the data collection, once again, is very linked to the framework that you create, because once again, it's about the framework, it's about the output, the indicators, and then of course the outcome, and also the indicators around that. So, it really is sort of the data you collect on the organizational level. Sometimes you have to ask the organization beforehand to send some of the data, and then that has to go vis-a-vis the financials, and then also using questionnaires and, in field, going there and collecting the data from the beneficiaries. Now, all of this is, again, time consuming, and we're looking at more efficient ways of using technology around it. But at least now we're still doing it this way. And the nice thing about the data is this really allows you to create a process where, where you can have the baseline data, and from that, given that you're looking at the projection of the financials, you can make the assumption with the organization in terms of looking at the future, what the social indicators, the environmental indicators will look like. So in terms of the type of the data, you have the baseline, the midterm data, and then of course the post-participation. You can go into sort of details, or we can sometimes lump it together and say, okay, the baseline, and let's just sort of jump into the forward-looking data. We do, as I said, have focus group and some structured interviews, and then we also, of course, look at comparable data, by looking at some of the World Bank reports and UNDP reports and all that. So all of this sort of come together very nicely. And then, again, as we populate the database with it, we looked at the projected for the next 5 years usually. Then we use a discount rate, which is usually the discount rate of the current, the organization, if you're working with them, the discount rate we're using for their discounted cash flow. And usually it's a weighted cost of capital, meaning how costly it is for them to get the debt or the equity. And then we also take some country risk and discount it back. So that's where you see the summation of the monetized social impact divided by the summation of the investment. So the money that's going to go in as an investment. And the one is divided by the other because for every dollar investment, you want to see what's the social return on investment. So the reason, SROI has gotten a bit of a following globally is because it's one number, and it's a one number that allows the investors to see for each dollar she's putting in, what's the return she's going to get. So this is a very practical way of looking at social return, and it makes the projection and the result of the projection much easier. It's a number that can be benchmarked, and frankly, again, it's also recognized worldwide. So it sort of allows you to sort of see the investment you're doing. What's this SROI, say, in Indonesia versus an investment that you're doing in Kenya? What's the SROI in that? So you can kind of say, what it looks like. We usually see with our projects, the enterprises we work with, the average SROI is really between 3 and 4, which is actually quite good. So for every dollar, you have $3 to $4. We see on average. Some of them are lower, some of them are higher, but that's sort of the average. We see. So in terms of how to calculate the SROI, and this will again make more sense when you actually do one yourself. But again, you see here the required information is the historical and the projected growth. So again, the historical numbers do come in as a benchmark. The projected growth, you actually need to have this list of the stakeholders, if you remember, and basically the activities that they have and the impact that's on their lives, and turning those into numbers. You have the financial information that goes with it. And then, of course, we look at all this and once again projecting it out and discounting it back. So the SRY is the ratio of net impact to the net investment capital. So once again, that's very important to sort of keep in mind. And the net, why is it net? It's really the impact minus the dead weight. And the dead weight means the impact that would have happened even without that organization. So meaning, for example, if the government would have put some resources behind creating some schools in that area. So if the organization is in educating the children in that area, well, you said, okay, how much of it is actually you're doing and how much of it is the government, with their policy that created that impact.
So what we just covered today are really the importance for evaluating impact as an investor. And as you saw, we spent a lot of time even helping you understand what kind of investor you are and how you should actually approach the investment. We walked through how to measure the impact using IIX's proprietary assessment methodology, the pyramid. And then also we explored key elements of the assessment process, from establishing the theory of change to calculating the social return on investment. So I hope you got a lot out of this class. And as always, if you have time, I highly encourage you to go through the additional reading, because that will really put things in perspective, what you hear in this lecture, and it will also help you ask questions when we actually have that opportunity. So thank you very much, and we'll connect again soon.